Chris Smith. I work at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. It is good to be with you again for another Lunchtime Discovery lecture. We have these every Wednesday, most Wednesdays, at noon right here at the museum's YouTube channel. Subscribe below to make sure that you get all of the great science content that we bring you every single week. And you can click the bell to get notified when we're going live with another Lunchtime Discovery Series presentation, because we gather here, right here on YouTube and on the museum's Facebook page, in order to meet interesting people and learn something new about what's going on in the world of science, nature, education. We always meet interesting people. They tell great stories. We learn a lot. And it's just kind of fun to hang out with other smart people who are interested and curious about what's going on in the natural world. Today, of course, is going to be no different. We've got a great program for you because we're going to be talking with I'm going to say the expert on cicadas, especially these periodical cicadas that you may have been seeing or hearing about in the news. Maybe you've even seen some as they begin to emerge, called Brood 10. Brood 10. We're going to be talking all about those in just a moment. This presentation every week is brought to you by us at the Museum of Natural Sciences. We host it right here on our YouTube channel, but it's organized and supported by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education as well. Many thanks to them for their help and support. Make sure that you visit EENorthcarolina.org in order to see more upcoming presentations and the schedule for future events. Great resources there. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Dr. Jean Kritsky is the Dean of the School of Behavioral and Natural Sciences at Mount St. Joseph University in Cincinnati. Dr. Kritsky, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Chris, it's great to be here and be in North Carolina virtually. I had the pleasure of visiting the state last year when we had an off-cycle emergence of Brood 19 in North Carolina. And so it was an exciting time. And not only did I enjoy cicadas, I enjoyed some fine barbecue as well. And so,
oh yeah, there you go.
So it's great to be.
So you just sort of like travel all over the eastern U.S. tracking down cicadas?
My wife and I visit every brood that we can, and we monitor the cicadas. And of course, now with Cicada Safari, we need the help of a lot of citizen scientists out there and science educators to help us get a good idea about where the cicadas are. And this is the first time we tried something this ambitious. So it's not only to get the word out, to get people using the app, but also to talk about these bugs of history. And
I'm excited to hear about them. I'm looking at the chat on YouTube right now, and it looks like we've got folks from all over the state watching right now. So folks, I'll remind you too, jump in the chat box and in the comments thread. Let us know where you're watching from. Definitely let us know if you're starting to see any cicadas popping up. I've seen pictures online from places around like the mid-Atlantic where they're showing up. Like I think I saw somebody in Maryland had them, and I was very jealous because I haven't seen any yet and don't know if I'm going to get to see any. Folks are watching from Kinston, Washington, Wilmington, nearby in Raleigh. And I'll just go ahead and say, I know that the audience for this program are all about citizen and community science. So Dr. Kritsky, I think you're going to have a lot of willing volunteers as cicada season comes around.
Great. I think I'll begin then. I'm going to start up my slides, and got multiple screens going here. So we'll see if we can. Here we go. Chris, are we seeing the slides?
Looks great.
Excellent. Well, I'm actually one slide back for my contact information for people who might be interested. Thank you for that nice introduction. As I mentioned, I spent some time here in your state last year with the off-cycle emergence of Brood 19, and I was looking forward to going back soon, especially after hearing all the new things going on at the museum. What I want to do today is introduce you to some of the foundational information that we have about periodical cicadas, and especially Brood 10, which is the largest of all the 17-year cicadas, and which will occur in Western North Carolina. And so that makes it very pertinent. And also as a plea for help, we need more Cicada Safari scouts out west of the western part of the state to help us get a really good idea about where they are. I think the last thorough effort to map the whole country was in 1902. They did some partials in 1936, but from then on, it's all been done locally. Excuse me. So this is a national effort, and we're hoping to get a large response. And I'll tell you what the response is so far. So let's start from the fundamentals to get everybody on the same page. What are cicadas? Cicadas are insects that belong to the insect order Hemiptera. Those are insects with piercing, sucking mouth parts, things like down here on the slide, things like stink bugs that you see here and bed bugs here, but they're more closely related to other Hemiptera, the aphids, which used to be in the order Homoptera, but that's all been fused. So it depends on which field guide you're looking at. There's a family Cicadidae, the family of cicadas. And this family goes back to the Mesozoic. There's a superfamily that goes back even further, the Cicadoidea, which includes a very small group called the hairy cicadas. But the family Cicadidae definitely goes back into the Mesozoic. I'm tickled to point out that George Pernard and I described a cicada nymph that dates back to 110 million years ago. And that was a little cicada crawling out of the egg nest and fell into into some sap that became Burmese amber. And I like the fact that 110 million years ago, the ancestor of T-Rex was wandering around in forests in Southeast Asia, where cicadas were screaming in the trees. And even so far as that the American Museum of Natural History, when they built their COSI exhibit in Columbus, Ohio, actually put cicada shells in the exhibit with the dinosaurs. So I felt very vindicated with that. We have that's where they belong. A lot of people always say to me, well, don't we have cicadas every year? And yes, we do. There are annual cicadas in addition to the periodical cicadas. Here in Ohio, we have 20 species total of cicadas, and you can find out what you have in North Carolina easily by going to cicadamania.com. They've got a really nice pictorial guide to all the cicadas in your state, even samples of the calls and things like that. It's run by my good friend Dan Mosguy. And it's a great site if you're into all sorts of things, including cicadas, not just periodical cicadas, all the cicadas, not just periodical cicadas. The difference between periodical and annual cicadas is pretty straightforward. On this slide here, you've got 4 annual cicadas. And the 2 slides pictures are not to scale one another. The annual cicadas tend to be bigger than periodical cicadas. The annual cicadas will start emerging in July, and depending on how hot June is, they might even start in late June. They are camel colored, as you can see. They're that nice olive green with brown and black, and they've got big eyes, almost like a very flat line, almost a straight line between the eyes on the front of the face. They're big, they're robust, they come out in small numbers. You often hear them in the trees going bzz, 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 bzz in the late summer and into the fall. Their whole survival is to come out and be cryptically colored, and just a few species hanging out in the trees. You can go looking for them. They're hard to find, again, because of this camel color. And they'll be done by, probably mid to late October. The last ones will be dying off. That's what we have here in Ohio, and it's pretty close similar in North Carolina. The periodical cicadas, on the other hand, they emerge in May and June. In fact, 3 days ago is when they started to emerge in Ohio. And last night, my wife and I were outside the house we bought just a couple of years ago. We actually bought it, and before we signed the papers, we made sure we had brood 10 cicadas on our property. So it's nice to do your field work just outside. And so we had about 50 emerge last night. So we're beginning. Yesterday was the first day we hit the 80s. So today it's 80 again. We're expecting even more tonight. So that's kind of exciting. The periodical cicadas emerge in May, and they'll be gone by the end of June. They have red eyes, orange colored veins on their wings, and black bodies. And as you see these side by side, you're not going to get them mixed up at all. It's pretty straightforward. Also, periodical cicadas come out in massive numbers. Unlike annual cicadas, which are cryptic, periodical cicadas want you to see them. They want to feed the predators all the cicadas they can eat, and there's still millions left. You can also take these species pretty easily to identify them to species level. There's 2 sizes, one large one and 2 small ones that are emerging this year with with brood 10, and I'll get to what may be happening with a 13-year brood in North Carolina in a minute. If you look at them from the top, they all look pretty similar. You turn them over, and you can see the coloration differences. On Decim, you got all this orange on the underside of the abdomen. Cassini is entirely black, and Decula has very, very fine orange bands, a lot finer than you see here in Decim. If you're confused, it's also it's usually smaller. But what if you get a really small septum decim? Turn it over and look at the eyes. And this is a photograph, by the way, that I took when brood 6 emerged in North Carolina the last time. Red eyes, there's this orange patch right here. That's diagnostic of septum decim. And so if you're not sure, look at the eyes. That separates decim from decula. And of course, decim has more orange on the abdomen that you find here with decula. But sometimes it's always good to have that backup to look at it. There are 4 species of 13-year cicadas. And there's 2 large ones and 2 small ones. The large ones they all look very similar from the top. One side, this is about just under 2 inches from head to the tip of the wing, as the large species, but about 1.5 on average for the smaller ones. You flip them over, and you'll see the underside, how they vary. This is neotridecim. This occurs mostly out west in brood 23, for example. So you will not have to worry about that so much in North Carolina. This is tridecula, which has a lot more considerably more orange than you see in the neotridecim, but the tridecim here, I said tridecula, I misspoke. This is tridecim. It is a 13-year form. Their song of all 3 of these are very similar, but these 2 in particular, without the same year, they're at different pitches. And so you can hear 2 distinct zones of where the calls are to know that there's 2 species present. And then, of course, we have back to the slide. We have Triticasini and Tridecula, same color pattern that's going on here. Now, Cicada Safari has reported cicadas in the Raleigh-Durham area this year. Not many. I think we've had maybe about a dozen or so. And the kicker is, what are they? Are they brood 10 cicadas that have been missed? What we're discovering, the more we get more sophisticated with our mapping efforts, is that we've been missing populations that have been around all the time but haven't been reported. So the question is, are we missing populations, or is something else going on? There is a possibility you've got a few off-cycle brood 19 cicadas emerging. Brood 19 is expected in 2024 in your area, but brood 19, the way we'll be able to tell them apart, if you find this tridecim with all this orange, please take a photograph of the underside and send it to Cicada Safari, because that's the kind of evidence that could tell us that would be a straggler or off-cycle population. And notice how much more orange there is here compared to what you see in the 17-year form here. Narrow bands with lots of black in between versus almost entirely orange on the underside. That's important information. So if you can send that to us, that'd be great. You'll notice that and I'll go back to the form here. You can sex them very easily. The female has a much more pointed abdomen than the male. So the middle one here is female, and these are males. If you want an image of that, we have it on the cicadasafari.org as well as on the app, the same photograph for you to examine. We have learned so much about the evolutionary relationships of these 13-year and 17-year cicadas in the last 5-10 years that we've got a real story to tell now. It's really neat. As I mentioned, they were out there. The family goes back into the Mesozoic. We know that the cicadas were definitely around by the end of the Cretaceous. We've got wonderful annual cicada fossils from the Dominican Republic, amber. That's only about 20 million years ago. Based on DNA study, it looks like the common ancestor for Magis cicada existed in the Pliocene, and 3.9 million years ago, that's when it diverged, split into 2 species, one of the large one and one small one. The small one split 2.5 million years ago. And now we have our 3 species groups, the decims, the tridecim, the neotridecim, and the septendecim. And then we have all the smaller ones. We have the cassini and the triticasini and the tridecula and the septendecula. And all that, and that occurred, all this evolution occurred in the last 300,000 years. And so, and many of the broods that we're looking at are probably less than 25, 30,000 years old. And a lot of the history of where the broods are has to do with where you are in relation to the ice ages. Here in Ohio, 20,000 years ago, there were no cicadas because the ice sheet was just 25 miles north of where I'm sitting. It took 6,000 years for that ice sheet to retreat north of Toledo. And as it retreated, the forest came with it. The cicadas came with the forest. And if you look at the distribution of all the broods in Ohio, there's patterns that suggest that the extent of the last ice age, the maximum where it progressed before it started to retreat, that created the physiography which influenced the distribution of the broods. So it's something that we're looking at with quite a lot of interest. I've said broods. What are broods? Broods are year classes, just like this year's the graduating class of 2021. But broods was how we described these various clusters of cicadas coming out. And there was a lot of confusion in the 19th century. There were at least 3 different ways of describing 2 kinds of things talking about broods, and one using emergence years, but they didn't talk to each other when they created these numbers. So what would be brood 1 in one system was brood 9 in the other, and it was very confusing. And so in the 1890s, Charles Marlett made a proposal that for every 17-year cicada that emerges in 1893, that's brood 1. Every 17-year cicada emerging in 1894, that's brood 2. And numbers 1 through 17 are reserved for the 17-year cicadas. And then for all the 13-year cicadas, every 13-year cicada coming out in 1893, that's brood 18. The next one in 1884 is brood 19, and 18 through 30 are reserved for 13-year cicadas. So just saying, you've got brood 10 coming out this year in many parts of the US. Brood 10, because it's 1 through 17, is a 17-year cicada. In 2024, North Carolina will have brood 19. It's a 13-year cicada because it's obviously between 18 and 30. But it turned out, and it's with this numbering system, what was really amazing is it helped us create maps to better understand the broods. The periodical cicadas are uniquely adapted to life in the eastern deciduous forest. As you see for this distribution map, they don't get into northern Wisconsin or Michigan. Some get to, there's a few up in 2 or 3 counties for brood 7 getting in upstate New York, but they don't get to Maine, New Hampshire. They're not getting farther west, the East Coast of Nebraska and Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. They don't get down into Florida. So it's really uniquely adapted to our eastern deciduous forest. And when we had this brood system, this numbering system, things started to fall into place. It turns out there are 15 extant broods of cicadas. There are 12 different broods of 17-year cicadas and 3 broods of 13-year cicadas. I'm not going to go through each one individual, but here's a map showing how the different broods map out. You see they're clustered. Brood 1, 2, and 3 at the top. Brood 1 is scattered in as you can see in Southern Virginia, and so new population was found recently in northeastern Tennessee. Looking at what's going on in North Carolina, you've got brood 2. Brood 3 is out west in Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois. Brood 4 is the only brood that's entirely west of the Mississippi. Brood 5 is one that we have here in Ohio and gets into Northern Virginia. Brood 6, that's a really nice brood, and it's out there in western North Carolina. And I've visited brood 6 on several occasions. Brood 7 up in New York. Brood 8, extreme northeastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And then last year we had brood 9. That's the one that I visited out west in your state. An incredible, nice brood of 17-year cicadas. Last of to finish the 12, here's brood 10. We're talking about this year, and I'll talk about that a little more in detail. We don't have an 11 or 12, but we do have a brood 13 that's out in Illinois, and brood 14 and 10 overlap. And that's in part because we were seeing now that indeed broods can accelerate and slowly change over time and become adjacent brood, and then eventually the lagging brood will disappear. Brood 10 and brood 14. And my work here in Cincinnati has shown that brood 14 has been accelerating 4 years and slowly becoming brood 10 and making brood 10 larger. And in the last 2 emergences, we've had actually brood 10 populations accelerate, and we've now got reproducing populations emerging during brood 6 years. So a new population of brood 6 cicadas has formed through these accelerations. And I'll talk about how that happens in a little bit. The 13 Sorry, I even have my phone turned off. So brood 19 here, and brood 22 and brood 23. As you can see, 19 is right through the center of the state of North Carolina. And I mentioned that brood 6 and brood 10 are out there more towards the west of the state. And here it is. Here's your periodical cicada decoder ring, if you will. The earliest, I'd start back here with this line with 1621, because in 1634, the Pilgrims recorded the cicadas in Massachusetts. That's our oldest historic record. In 1715, Reverend Andreas Sandel reported cicadas in Philadelphia. That's our oldest historical record of cicadas for brood 10. And in my new book, Periodical Cicadas, the brood 10 edition, published by the Ohio Biological Survey, and it's available through Amazon, for example. I have a brief history of major events that occurred in each of the 18 emergences since including 1715 and all the ones that followed. So what are the signs? What are the first signs we're going to see about cicadas? What should we be looking for? Well, we've already seen the first ones, and you may have seen them in North Carolina, is the formation of chimneys. In April, the April showers that we talk about, and April showers bringing May flowers creates the sustained rainfall for a day, entices the cicadas underground to extend their tunnels by balling up little bits of mud and extending it. The largest ever reported that I've seen in the literature is about 12 inches. But as you see here, these kind of little balls of mud, a little finer and a little smaller in detail compared to the mud bugs. I just sort of learned that name a few weeks ago because I found a mud bug chimney, a crayfish chimney in one of our surveys. Here's one that I observed just in 2004, and it's about 3 inches tall. And you can see it's just a little ball. And if you turn it around, you'll actually see inside the hollow tube that the cicada would go into. So as it rains, the water gets into the tunnel. That entices the cicada to do this, and they actually crawl up to the top. And then as the water is finally drains out of their tunnel, they go back down, and it'll actually even form a new cap to keep them protected if this should be damaged or someone steps on it. Some of the highlights that you can tell about the immature stages, notice that at a 12-year-old periodical cicada has white eyes. Indeed, they develop their red eyes the fall, the year before they're going to emerge. So last November, I was out digging up cicada nymphs, and the ones for brood 10 were red. Over in our brood 14 area, they had white eyes. So they get that the fall before they emerge. And then just before they're ready to leave the ground, they develop these black patches on their thorax. And so if you run across cicadas in the ground and they've got white eyes right now, you're probably looking at brood 19 in western in North Carolina, or you could be looking at brood 6, because they're not going to be coming up for several more years. But if you find some with red eyes and they don't have the black patches, that means they're still going to come out this year. So periodical cicadas emerge when the soil temperature reaches 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's really helpful to have a nice soaking rain, not a big downpour, not one of those once in a generation storms we seem to have every year now, but just get the ground wet, and then they really pop. And here's a photograph of a cicada nymph that had just poked out of the soil. I was with a film crew from Japan, and they wanted to get video of this actually happening. And they had set up this ring of lights. It was almost looked like the ET set, where they were going to show all they're waiting for to see if find cicadas coming out of the ground. Nothing happened. And so I sort of turned around and walk out of the area, and I looked at the ground, and all around behind them where it was dark, they were popping up. It was the lights for their filming that was stopping this. So we turned everything around. I got this picture by just laying the camera on the ground and getting just as it poked its head out. First time it's seen daylight since it crawled out of the egg 17 years earlier. They come out of holes in the ground. They're about the size of your pinky in many cases. These holes, one of the neat things you can do is actually measure the density. After the emergence is done, these holes persist, and you can put down a meter or a yard, 1 square yard or 1 square meter grid, and count the holes. And that's where we get our density studies. This is a photograph of the site that was the most dense I have ever found, 356 per square meter. That's a lot of bugs. In fact, this is a photograph in a cemetery, and under that one tree, if you look at the area under the tree, they're not going to emerge in open fields. So they were going to be under a tree, but in the area under that tree, that canopy, it looked like they will produce 7,000 cicadas. In this little portion of the cemetery where there are 26 of these trees, our grid shows that they produced 230,000 nymphs. That's a lot of bugs. No matter how you want, it's a lot of bugs. Once they get that critical soil temperature, and they all don't come out at once. As you'll notice, if you have a tree, let's say on a slight hill with a south-facing exposure, they're going to come out first there than they will on a tree on a north-facing slope with them that won't get the direct sun earlier. So it takes about 2 full weeks for this to happen. So if you miss it one night, you haven't missed it, it'll be going on for a couple of weeks. They start coming out. They come out. They come out. They climb up vertical surfaces. They climb up vertical surfaces to lock their tarsal claws into the bark of a tree or a fence. I've seen this on grass, blades of grass, on weeds, on tires, whatever, brick walls, and whatever. They do this as they start the transformation of the adult, and you watch carefully. You watch them as they climb up. And eventually they'll stop, and they'll sort of, it looks like they're just sort of jostling position. You know, they're not sure what they're going to get. And then they finally lock in there. And this, I watched this just last night, not even 24 hours ago. All of a sudden you see that split as the nymphal skin splits on the thorax first. And you can see inside the creamy white adult inside. That split continues through the pronotum and then cracks the head capsule. And then the adult cicada inside wriggles its way free, pulling itself out of the nymphal skin, pulling itself out so far, it's nearly hanging upside down. The only thing holding the cicada there is just the narrowness of the opening and the strength of that old nymphal skin, holding on to that abdomen. These filaments, these are the trachea from the nymph. They had to be pulled out of the adult when it left. If you thought puberty was bad, imagine just what cicadas go through in your lung, where your breathing tubes are pulled out of your body and you have new ones in there. But it's got to be somewhat of a, pardon the pun, a gut-wrenching experience. It hangs like this for about 20 minutes for its tarsal claws to harden so that it can actually pull the rest of the body out. And it does so by doing a sit-up, grabs a hold of the skin, and then maneuvers its abdomen free. And now you have the adult cicada outside of its skin, but the wings aren't expanded. It's going to do that by pumping fluid through the wing veins, pumping the fluid to the point where they look like a typical cicada. Now, from when it first popped out of the ground a few minutes ago to when you see it like this, that takes about an hour and a half. So if you are lucky enough to live in a cicada area, this is one of the things that's just so much fun to do. You find them, you pick one that's still, you get your favorite libation, and you get your kids, and you go out there and you sit and watch. It's night. This is going to happen after sundown, usually about 10 o'clock or so now with daylight savings time. You can watch the nymphs climb up there, and it's slow. It takes about an hour and a half. You got time. You can look around, and it's still happening. But it's like a Zen-like moment to watch this happen. And for me, and I'm sure for some of you, it was something like this, an experience, someone like this, that sparked that interest in natural history. And that's why I hope that people take Cicada Safari and go out with their kids and do this. Because by sparking that interest in natural history and science, we're going to get better physicians, we'll get more educators, we're going to get a lot, it's going to help. And so that's one of the benefits I see of cicadas, is helping to turn on, we all know dinosaurs, of course, are the drug to science, but this kind of insect activity, that's the one that can also help ensure that. Now, to turn dark completely, that takes another hour and a half. So about 2.5 to 3 hours is what it takes to pop out of the ground and get to this stage. But the cicadas are not yet entirely mature. They are going to crawl up to the top of a tree where they will continue hardening their exoskeleton, maturing their internal or reproductive organs, and that'll take about 5 full days. So after the emergence starts, you're not going to hear anything. And people get, where are they all getting eaten? What's going on here? And then you'll hear after 5 days, you'll hear one call here and a call there, call here. 6 days, more calls here, here, here. 3 days, sustained calling, but only like one individual at a time. 4 days, now it's getting loud. 5, 6, and now we're at the point where the trees are screaming with cicadas. And this can get up to pretty loud. I've measured them as loud as as 96 decibels. If you miss this transformation of the adult, you walk out the next morning, the whole area is littered with these shells, these cast exuvia, the old skins of the last nymphal stage. There's a lot of biology in these. If you should go to cicadasafari.org, which is the website that supports the app, there is a link to what's called a Cicada Safari research station. And it's a set of 6 projects that kids can do, schools can do, to provide more data on the emergence. For example, we've got records that suggest that more males emerge first than over the first 5 days than females. You could sex the skins. You could take them to species, and you can go out and collect. If you're not sure, let's say like when I was there last year, all the brood 19 cicadas were eaten. Even though I couldn't find any adults, I was able to take the skins to species, and that allowed me to monitor what was emerging 4 years early. So that's it. So if you miss it the first, not to matter. You're gonna find it the next night, and they keep coming. They keep coming. They keep coming. They keep coming. And as I say, this is a pear tree. Those are big bugs. You can't miss them. Now that they're singing, we've got the chorusing going on, and only the males sing, and they sing using these tymbals, and the tymbals are on the first abdominal segment. You can fold the wing back, and here you can see it. It's this sort of white area. The white is the same color white that the adult was before it hardened the exoskeleton and it changed color to be the dark black. This portion is unsclerotized. It does have little black ribs in it, which are bits of chitin that have sclerotized. On the inside, there are muscles that when they contract, they cause those muscles to buckle, which makes a sound. And you do that a couple hundred times a second, a minute, I should say, that makes the sound. Take a bendy straw and you pull it out, snap it up, pull it back and forth, and do that a couple hundred times a second, you're going to get the sound. The male's abdomen is hollow, and that serves as a resonating chamber. And so the males gather in trees and they call for a mate. Females don't have tymbals, but they do respond. They respond by flicking their wings. So looking at septendecim, they're the ones that have the call that some people like to say, it sounds like pharaoh. I'll demonstrate. You'll hear, I don't, if you can't see me, you'll hear the clap. I'll clap when the female responds. Okay, if he hears that, he turns towards her. He walks closer to her. Now, at this time, if there's another male nearby and he hears the wing flicks, he will sometimes start calling right at the point before she will flick her wings for male number 1. So she flicks her wings to that male, and then he turns towards her. The other one, and so there's all this competition. So now, as he keeps getting, now they're getting closer still, and then he goes to a second call. No spot for her to flick her wings, just right, close proximity. He then starts tapping her on the back with his thorax and starts a third call, which coincides with the beginning of physical copulation. That call is. So there you have it. The mating calls and the pickup rituals for periodical cicadas. They gather in these chorusing centers, thousands of males. And if you watch this, you'll notice that the sound isn't when they're all the species together. The 3 species do emerge simultaneously. They all have their calls. The large species, septendecim, one I was just demonstrating, its call sounds like in a chorus where there's thousands singing, what a Foley artist would have used to make the sound of a flying saucer in a 1950s movie. The Castanei, the one with the all black abdomen, it's a series of buzzes and clicks, but it's in a chorus. It sounds like shh. So you got the flying saucer call at the top. You got the shh, and the decula is sounds like a rotary sprinkler head, and you can hear all 3 of those. And one of the neat things about the Cicada Safari app is you can take a video, and we can hear those calls in the video. And so when you hear if you get to hear a screaming tree, turn on the video in Cicada Safari, take a 10-second video of the tree. You don't need to see the cicadas, but we'll be able to tell the species by the audio. That's kind of sweet. Well, they're mating, they're copulating, and this can take several hours for periodical cicadas. After copulation is done, the female will lay her eggs. Now, males can mate more than once. They about 85% only mate once, 10% mate twice, about 5% maybe 3 times. But after mating, and 85% of the time, the male will die. After mating, the female then will lay her eggs in the ends of tree branches, about where they have about the point where they have the thickness of like a pencil. And she does this. You can see right at the end here. This is her ovipositor, literally puncturing that part of the branch. Here's an enlargement of the ovipositor. You can see it's got these notches on the side. It turns out that the ovipositor is serrated, and it glides on a stabilizing rod, and as it saws into the surface, that allows the ovipositor to puncture the branch. And once inside the branch, the ovipositor lays eggs at the base, one on each side of where the ovipositor is, laying these pairs of eggs as it pulls out. And that's anywhere between 10 to 20, some cases maybe of size 40 eggs each with these egg nests. And she'll continue doing that until she runs out of eggs. And she's got about 500 eggs. I actually had students count these. We counted up to 30,000 eggs, and we had enough of a sample to say what the average was. And it was just over 500 per female. One of the neat things about this, one of the things that my lab was involved with was, if you're familiar with like ichneumon wasps, for example, or beetles that bore under bark, the mandibles or the ovipositor, the egg-laying structure, is reinforced with metals. And so the question is, are cicadas, which are totally unrelated to the beetles and the Hymenoptera, the bees, wasps, ants, Hymenoptera, the Coleoptera, the beetles, do we see the same thing in Hemiptera and particularly the cicadas? So we analyzed the chemical structure of the serrated ends, and we did find that yes, indeed, cicadas are also, their ovipositor is also reinforced with metals, zinc, manganese, and others. So it's really quite amazing. We've got armored cicadas out there. Isn't that kind of cool? Doing this thing. After she lays her eggs, she dies. The male dies. That's it. 17 years underground and 1 short month of singing, song, and sex, and they're dead. This is what the egg laying looks like. You can see here that in this case, the ovipositor would be inserted here, pushed all the way down, pulled out, laying eggs on each side. This is really tearing up the tissue on the branch. She then walks 1/4 of an inch, does it again, and so on. And this can tear up the vascular tissue so much that it can cause the leaves to turn brown, wilt. And sometimes even that weak point where the damage was, it'll cause them to break and snap there. They might fall to the ground, but they're sort of dangling like flags. And we call this flagging. And while this discoloration looks like the tree was hit by a strong hailstorm, and it discolors the tree, not every branch is going to be flagged. It reduces it has a 50% mortality on the eggs if the twig dries out too much. So that's a concern. But it turns out this is a bit like a natural pruning. In 1869, a paper was published in American Entomologist titled "Out of Evil Cometh Good." And it turned out that year in 1869, farmer orchardists in Illinois and Missouri were reporting a bumper crop that year. And they attributed it to the heavy egg-laying damage of the cicadas the year before. Because the brood 10 emerged, and brood 10 and 19 emerged simultaneously in 1868, and that damage essentially was like going up to these tall trees and nipping some of the branches, and so the flower set was really intense the next year. I was a bit concerned about that claim, so here's a picture taken in I don't own this house anymore, but on the left is a crabapple, and you can see all these cicadas on this crabapple. The egg laying was just intense as all get out. And the photograph on the right is the crabapple the next spring when it flowered. It had an incredible flower set. It looked like a snowball with a trunk. So there may be something to this. We need to have more data on this to say, but they've been thinking about, orchardists have been saying this now for over a decade. You can see at any time, if you want to determine whether or not your property or a particular area has cicadas, you can find cicada damage back 17 years. If you know your tree morphology, you can find the annual scar of the growth, and you can go up and look and find 4 healed egg nests. Here's after 1 year, you can see the egg nest is beginning to heal over. And then after 17 years, you can still see the remnants of the egg nest in the branches. So it's a neat way of trying to keep track of the years. I've even found examples of 34-year-old egg nests. They're a little harder to verify. They don't look as nice, but you'll see these long healed areas back on the branches. This is about the diameter of a quarter, if you don't know how to count the annual scars. But so you just go back further down back of the branch, and you'll see these very diagnostic healed egg nests. The cicadas die. Their carcasses collected at the base of trees, and boy, do they stink. Think of all the hundreds of millions of cicadas and all that biomass, and getting them wet with a morning dew or a light rain and 90-degree summer temperatures, they will rot. And as they rot, they decay. And that's part of the nutrients that will go back into the soil to help the cicadas. Indeed, this is one of the things when people always ask, well, what good are cicadas? And what people are, but as environmental educators, you're going to get that question. Well, it turns out if we wiped out all the cicadas, our forests would probably still be here. They're not like a beaver that can change the whole nature of a region by damming up things and changing the plants and whatever, which changes the plants. Instead, cicadas, as they go through their life, do a lot of good for the eastern deciduous forest. While they're underground tunneling, they're turning over soil just like earthworms. Maybe not as much as earthworms. Some suggest that might be even greater, but there'll be thousands of these nymphs underground tunneling. When they come up from the ground, the holes they leave behind is like a natural aeration, as I mentioned. That's good for the soil. Also helps rainwater to get down in the summer if it's a hot summer. That food pulse that happens when all these adults come out, and this is part of their survival strategy, to feed all the animals out there as much as they can and still have millions of cicadas left. That food pulse can help some populations recover if they've had some events in the past. We're going to see things like raccoons, squirrels, rodents, birds of all sorts of things feasting on these things. Just last night when we found all these cicadas emerging, we noticed that there's a raccoon sleeping in a tree about 20 feet from it. And this morning it was on the ground picking up cicadas. The director of the Cincinnati Zoo, Thane Maynard, sent me a video last night of a barred owl on a front lawn hopping around picking up cicada nymphs as it could find it. And it was hearing the rustling. It was really, you'd see things looking at those and hop over and nab the cicada, and it was having a great time. So this is an opportunity. It's an opportunistic event. Nothing is going to evolve to depend on this. So when this happens, it's beneficial. And so we noticed, for example, in Southwest Ohio, an increase in our rodent population because of cicadas, and that was beneficial for our owls and raptors. So that has some long-term positive events. The Division of Wildlife has reported that male turkeys taken during turkey season after a cicada emerges in that region, the males tend to have a higher body weight. That's some positive thing as well. The eggs have been laid. The eggs take 6 to 10 weeks to hatch. They'll start hatching in the middle of July and into August. This is a neat project. You can go and look at all the trees of different species, and you can carefully dissect out the eggs in the egg nest. And an egg that hatches will look almost transparent. An egg that did not will look solid. So you got an idea about how many eggs are successfully hatching in the egg. And we were finding numbers in 13-year cicadas up to 94%, 17-year cicadas up to 85% of the eggs were successfully hatching. So that's a good number. In the soil, once the eggs hatch, as soon as they crawl out of that egg nest, they drop to the ground, and they get below the ground as fast as they can. It's neat to watch. I've seen this. It's amazing. It's like now you see it, now you don't. They don't crawl down the tree. They literally just fling themselves out in the air, and down they go to the ground. As soon as they hit the ground, if it's somebody's yard, they are on a blade of grass, and they are down at the ground, getting through whatever crack into the soil they can, because they're extremely vulnerable to ants, spiders, and beetles at this time. You're seeing on this slide a 1 minute old cicada in the upper right, SEM. Here, that's the first instar. Here's your second stage, third stage, fourth stage, and fifth stage. This graph here looks at the growth over a 12-year period. I stopped at 13 because this is entirely green after 13 years. But you'll notice that they grow at different rates. They're not all lockstep in the same growth. Here at year 8, for example, we had third instar, fourth instars, even some fifth instars. When they reach the fifth instar, that's the stage up here, that's as big as they're going to get, and they don't grow anymore, and they're 13 years old at that time. They're underground, they're not dormant, they're not sleeping, they are tunneling. It's cold down there, it's like 56 degrees, but that's enough to have them slowly active to keep their tunnels, and they stay about within 1 yard of where they hit the ground. Other questions that have been asked is, do they eat? The Greek legend is that when the muses came out and men heard music, they would just play and play music and starve to death. So they were turned into cicadas by the music, so they could make music without having to worry about eating. And so this notion is they don't eat. Well, it turns out they don't necessarily eat, but they have to remain hydrated, and they will puncture with their mouth parts, make small fine punctures into bark, and get a little bit of fluid to stay hydrated during their adult time in the outside. They got a fungal disease, and this fungal disease causes the tip of the abdomen to break off. This is something that was first described by Benjamin Banneker, a free Black American living in Maryland at the time. His mother was a freed slave. His father was from the Caribbean, never was a slave, and he caught the attention of Ellicott. The Tame Ellicott City is named after this guy, and this guy lent Benjamin his mathematics books. And Benjamin taught himself mathematics to the point where he could calculate eclipses, and he published several almanacs in the 1790s. He also observed the cicadas in 1749, 1766, 1783, and it was ready for the year 1800. It hadn't come out when he made this notation in his notebooks. And he was the first person to note that their hind end falls off. He didn't know why, but their hind end does fall off. He also noted in his diary that, and he wasn't the first necessarily to do this, but he noted that this cicada comes out every 17 years. That 17 is a prime number. And he thought that was interesting because he was very much interested in mathematics. And this is a fungal disease that is spread through physical contact, and it's spread to females by a copulation. A female can spread it to a male. An infected male will spread it to a female with spores going into the spermatheca, the structure that holds and nurtures the sperm in the female. It manifests itself, as you see, as this sort of chalky mass in the abdomen. The abdomen will pop off, and as it flies, it spreads the candida around as much as in various ways. The thing about this fungus is that it changes the behavior. These fungi that infect cicadas contain things like psilocybin. Now, the periodical cicada one doesn't, but they get psilocybin. That's the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and the periodical cicada gets as an amphetamine that's in this thing. And when a male gets infected, he stops acting like a male, and so when he hears another male sing, he flicks his wings, and the male will come over and try to copulate, and that helps spread the spores to that male. So it's not good for the cicada necessarily, but it certainly is good for the fungus. So that's some of the other things we'll be looking at. Well, we're looking at brood 10 of the periodical cicadas this year. And as you can see, in North Carolina, we've got several brood 10 records along the far western coast. We have had several come into Cicada Safari. We've had a few come into my wife, Jessie, is coordinating the iNaturalist project for periodical cicadas. And we'll be joining all the data will be combined when we do our final analysis. Cicada Safari, and one of the reasons we're interested in getting a good map for brood 10 is that in starting the 1890s, the USDA was worried that brood 10 might go extinct. And the research that Frank Young and I have done for Indiana and Ohio did indeed show that in the northern regions of where brood 10 used to be, it is now in smaller numbers, highly patchy, or disappeared completely. The large circles are heavy infestation, small circles scattered, and the open circles are counties that no longer have cicadas. So brood 10 is in decline. And so we're hoping to get a good sense of where brood 10 is. And to do that, Mount St. Joseph University, I'm tickled to say, they bought me an app. I told our technology director, but wouldn't it be nice to have an app to map these things out? And they decided that it'd be a worthwhile investment to do this. So we created Cicada Safari 3 years ago. We've already tested it with brood 8 and brood 9. And what this involves, it's a free app, by the way. It doesn't track what you buy at Amazon. It doesn't care what you looked at with the Google. It only wants people to go out there and photograph cicadas. It's available at the App Store for the iPhone and Google Play for Droids. What you do, you download the app, and then you go out on your own Cicada Safari and you see a cicada and you touch this button at the bottom and you take its picture. And then when you submit it, there's a little, after you take the picture, there's a little airplane icon, a little paper airplane, you touch that, it sends it to Cicada Safari, or to our servers. Every one of our photographs is examined by human eyes. And if it's a verified periodical cicada, it goes on our live map. And you can go to our live map within the app right now, and you can see where in North Carolina the cicadas have been reported. Very interesting. Right across the border from Western North Carolina, we've got a positive report of a cicada in periodical cicadas in Northern South Carolina. That's a first. And one of the things that we're looking at is it possible that there are brood 10s that are missing or that we've considered not be gone? We've had several emergencies now in Alabama that very likely could be remnant brood 10. So we're working on that as well. It's an amazing app that is helping us zero in on what's going on. I'm both overwhelmed and tickled to tell you that as of this morning, 135,000 people have downloaded the app, the Cicada Safari. And this is the scary thing. We're getting 20,000 photographs a day. We were hoping to get 50,000 photographs to help us map out brood 10. As of this morning, we were at 105,000 photographs. And the emergence is just beginning. So our database for this emergence is going to be overwhelming. So I'm hoping that my colleagues in Western North Carolina in particular will download the app. And if you want more information, similar to what I just talked about, I'm sorry, this is a shameless plug for my book, Periodical Cicadas, the Brood 10 edition. You can get it on Amazon. There's 3 versions at 3 different price levels: the color, black and white, and ebook. But it has the historical records of all the areas in North Carolina where brood 10 has occurred. Let's says going through this, I'm looking here. I'm seeing 1885s in Will County, 1885 in Surrey County. We've got an 1834 in Lincoln County. We have Granville, 1885. These are just the oldest. Davie County, 1885. Davidson, Marsh, the city of Marsh of 1851. Cherokee, we go back to 1885. Catawba, Hickory, 1902. Burke, Morgantown, 1902. So those are the historic records, and we don't have a lot more modern ones because a lot of people aren't reporting them. So I need your help. I need your help, and join us. Cicada Safari is now becoming a group project involving many organizations in addition to Mount St. Joseph University and mine. We're now working with the Ohio Biological Survey, the website Cicada Mania, the Indiana Academy of Science, the University of Maryland, the University of Tennessee. I don't have their icons on here yet. The University of Kentucky are all promoting Cicada Safari to help us get this massive map. So I'm hoping that my friends at in North Carolina, especially at the museum, will help us map out brood 10 and maybe see if you've got some brood 19 going on in the middle part of the state. So thank you for your attention. I can take questions.
That was amazing. Gene, thank you so much.
Oh,
how fascinating. I'm almost speechless because the amount of information that you just gave us on these is incredible. And wow, what cool animals.
They are, aren't they?
What cool critters.
I'll close it up. I have a flip, sort of a crass answer. Somebody asked me one day, "What good are cicadas?" And I said, "They got me tenure."
And a book and an app
Yeah,
and all these speaking engagements.
and I've been working on cicadas for 45 years now. My first project was in '76 when I mapped out Brood 23 in Illinois, and so it's and one of the nice things about living here in an area and being here for a length of time is I got to see patterns that other people missed that were not in one location. So we've documented off-cycle emergences. We were the first to document off-cycle emergences that actually reproduced. That was never seen before. We've discovered a whole new brood that was totally misidentified for 2 centuries and turned out to be the first 13-year brood in the state. And you can do that if you're here long enough. So I am now the longest serving faculty member at the Mount. So I'm as old as the hills. When I started working here at the Cretaceous, but it's a lot of fun, and this is a great organism. It's wonderful.
Absolutely fascinating. All right, let me grab some questions that people are asking and give them to you now. Let's see. The first one that came up, Linda was curious if Brood 10 is going to be in the mountains of Virginia through June. Looking at the map, it looked like maybe if they're in like southwestern Virginia, might catch a few.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's one of the things we don't have some good data on. I was interviewed by some kind of an online magazine called Trekking or something like that, and they're an online magazine that focuses on the Appalachian Trail, and they did publish an article about 5 weeks ago encouraging people walking the Appalachian Trail to get Cicada Safari and report periodical cicadas along the trail. There's been very poor records of it. Usually, in many cases, probably too high elevation, maybe. We don't know. We had an aberrant record come in last year from right next to the trail, but down to the lower elevations from right next in the middle of the Cherokee National Forest. And one of the nice things with the cicada, as far as I can email these people, and I said, "This is the first. What is it real?" And it turned out from a woman who loves cicadas, got the app, and went out hiking just to try to find these things and found one, and was really excited to get us. That was a new county record for the cicadas, but that would be helpful to people who are going up there. I'd like to know.
Yeah, really, Linda, get the Cicada Safari app and go see if you can find some. Okay, let's see. The next one that popped up here is from Stephen. How did they come up with the name for the common ancestor Magicicada?
Well, they were one of the things is in 1749, a disciple of Linnaeus's, Pere Calme, came to the United States, and Brood 10 emerged in Philadelphia, where he was visiting. And Calme took specimens back to Sweden, and Linnaeus named the first periodical cicada, Cicada septendecim. And it was made. William Davis in 1925 felt they were different enough to be a unique genus compared to the genus Cicada. And because of the 17 years was magic, he thought Magicicada was the ideal name. So that goes back to 1925.
Okay, there you go. Let's see. Oh, you had mentioned this too. And Megan's asking, is Brood 14 accelerating due to climate change?
These yes and no. I've got evidence of accelerations going on long before the recent increasing in temperatures, but it looks like the acceleration of early emerging cicadas is becoming more often. In this current go around, Brood 2, Brood 3, Brood 5, Brood 10, Brood 13, Brood 14, and Brood 19 have all spun off 4-year accelerations. So whatever's causing it is something that's occurring over 30 states. It's not a local event. And the most common theme over these states is increasing temperatures. Now, how that would trigger it is we know they're counting the fluid flow in trees. And in December 2006 and January 2007 here in Cincinnati, we had an extremely warm winter, temperatures in the 60s, to the point where maple trees actually budded and started to leaf out. February, hard freeze, everything drops. I thought it was so unfair. I had to rake leaves twice that year. Then we have our normal spring in late March and early April, everything buds out again. in eastern Cincinnati, where brood 14 is expected the following year, thousands came out a year early because it was 2 years for them. Now, when we look at 13 versus 17-year cicadas, the major difference in their growth is underground in the first 5 years. 13-year cicadas molt an extra time compared to 17-year cicadas. If trees should do that during the first 5 years, a 17-year cicada is underground, that could trigger them to think that more time has passed than really has, and they will molt an extra time in the first 5 years. That will trigger the 4-year acceleration. So it is the right now the leading hypothesis for this relates to how the trees are reacting to increased temperatures and how that's influencing the cicadas. And as I said, several broods now have spun off 4-year accelerants in the last cycle of the emergences. And so, and again, we're looking at something that has to be continental because it's occurring over 20 states in the east.
Okay, fascinating. So cicadas underground are tracking time by sap flow and nutrient flow through the roots.
Yes, from the xylem fluid in particular, the water conducting fluid that brings the waters and minerals to the leaves. That's now been determined. The story I just told you was what I observed in 2007. It's been also tested in experimental conditions in greenhouses, and they were able to overtop peaches and get them to come out 2 years early.
Oh, wow. So, okay.
So it's clear that's what's going on. What we don't know is how do they remember what year it is?
Right.
And maybe that's tied to the fact they grow at different rates. Who knows? But we know that bees can count to 4. So how the cicadas have to count to 17.
All right. Let's see here. What will it mean for crops and forests, and do they travel far?
It's not going to hurt crops. Cicadas don't feed on. They're not chewing insects, so they're not going to do anything to crops, vegetables for gardens, or that type of thing, or flower gardens. With regard to forests, they will do when they come, they will cause that flagging, which is not a danger to mature forests. So it's happening. That's fine. They can travel about, it seems like up to a mile per emergence. That picture I showed you of my house with that big crabapple, that was in a development where they went in 1994 and they literally ripped out all the trees and then buried all the infrastructure, put in new roads, built the houses. And so not a single cicada came up under my tree. Those all flew in from surrounding areas. And there was a small tree about a quarter mile away that had cicadas. Most of these came from about 2/3 to 3/4 of a mile away. And they flew in, and that's caused when they get really heavy, and if males are being rejected over and over, they'll go to the neighboring trees, and if enough males get there to get enough singing going to attract more males and females, it's sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy, and so they will expand if they have to, if they're missing opportunities. And they're looking for, what's a female, they're looking for what's a female cicada looking for to lay her eggs in. She wants a tree in full sunlight that's going to mature a tree to live 17 years. They feed on grass roots for the first few weeks, so it's by low vegetation. So a tree in full sunlight, low vegetation, that's my backyard. That's your backyard. That's parks, that's cemeteries, that's arboreta. So we may be providing a major cicada habitat. Monty Lloyd, the great cicada researcher, back in the 80s, wrote a paper, why are cicadas more common in cities? And he felt that was part of it, that we're creating the ideal cicada habitat. So we may be the saving grace of cicadas.
Okay, cool stuff. All right, let's see. What have we got here? Next one. The viewer writes, I found a cicada nymph once on the roots of Nandina, not a tree, which surprised them. Are they partial to certain trees or plants for food sources?
When you say you found it, I assume that you're saying you found the skin or you saw the cicada nymph on the plant itself. They'll crawl up herbaceous plants and shed their skin. That's common to find that. They have now been reported to lay their eggs on over 200 species of woody plants. So they're not particular to one versus the other. They like deciduous plants, angiosperms, uh, uh, maples and oaks. They're widely oviposited upon, but they're mostly looking to stay probably close by if they can, but they will not reject a tree versus another. There have been some studies that in areas that find that if you compare uh, the nests of a variety of like 5-6 species, one will have more. The question that we have is it a preference? Is it location? Is it what's the cause? But they've been reported in over 200 species of woody shrubs, for example, rose bushes. I've seen them lay eggs in rose bushes if they have to.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Let's see. Do all the broods have the same call?
Yes. All the 17-year broods have the same 3 calls. The 3 different species each have a different call, but it doesn't vary by brood. And unfortunately, they don't have little numbers on the back, which would be really helpful if they had. The only way we can, when I discovered a 13-year brood in Ohio, the only thing that for some, well, no, everybody doubted the first time I published this stuff in my book, Periodical Cicadas Plaguing the Puzzle back in 2004. And so the answer to me was, Art, I'll see you in 2014. Just wait 13 years. And we did, and they came up with big numbers. But for a 13-year cicada, as I mentioned, if you can find that tridecim with that solid orange underside, that's also more evidence it's a 13-year cicada. And so if people find cicadas in the Raleigh-Durham area this year, that's what we want to look for, that larger one, and photograph the underside of the abdomen. That'll help us determine, is it a brood 10 population that we've missed, or is it 19 coming off cycle?
And then related, do they call both during the daytime and at night?
They tend to not call in the evening. They'll start probably when 10 and they get nice and warm and get really going in a hot afternoon, and they'll start slowing down in the afternoon. Of course, with daylight savings time, you might have a few calling in the late evening, but they'll die down because there is a visual component. So when it's dark, they can't see their potential mate.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense then. All right, I'm going to do one last look here just to be safe. Looks like we're over time anyway. So Dr. Kritsky, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being on the program today.
Well, I probably enjoyed it. It's always good. As I said, I need help in North Carolina, and it's one of the reasons why I was glad to get the invitation.
Well, there's definitely folks on this call who I think are going to be submitting observations to, well, probably iNaturalist and Cicada Safari, if I know this group.
Either one is welcome. My Wee Corby is my wife, Jessie Smith, and so she's with the iNaturalist project. They're doing species, a lot of species identification if possible. Cicada Safari is dealing more with brood metapopulation, so we want to know where they are as a cluster. We could take them to species, but that's not as critical because normally we know from general things that most of the species are together. But so there's she's got I want to say well over 1,000 now reports with the INET. And it is growing. So I'd be surprised she has fewer than 10,000 at the end. So, but mapping this thing out is a major effort, and we need your help. And I appreciate the help.
That's great. And everybody, I dropped a link to the Cicada Safari website. That's a tongue twister. In the chat box a couple of times. So check that out. As soon as we're done here, I'll add it to the show notes below so that everybody who comes to visit this video in the future can get in touch and get engaged. And, everybody, if you're out there and you find some cicadas, tweet about it too. Tag it with the hashtag NC Nature. I think there's NC Nature Friday. So just save it till a Friday and then post it then. But you can always tag the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences on social media at Natural Sciences. You can tag the Office of Environmental Education on Twitter. They're at North Carolina EE, because we want to see your observations too. I think that's fascinating. Make sure that you do that. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. We'll see you again next Wednesday at noon. We'll be talking about coastal North Carolina with 2 guests from the NC Coastal Federation. Don't miss it. We'll see you again soon. Hey, take care, stay safe, keep your community safe. Bye, everybody.